Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Astrology and this is Astrology for Beginners. To start off, you may know your sun sign. Your sun sign is not everything there is about astrology, and I feel like that's why a lot of people write astrology off to begin with, because they're like, oh, I'm a Taurus and I've read what a Taurus is supposed to be and I kind of identify with some of it, but like I can kind of identify with any of them. And I feel like I know people who are not Tauruses who identify with being a Taurus. So this whole astrology thing doesn't really make any sense to me, and I think it's pretty silly. And I used to be one of those people, actually. I consider myself to be a pretty logical and analytical thinker, and I thought that the whole astrology thing was nonsensical until someone read my birth chart and interpreted it for me. And then I started to realize, wow, there's like so much more to this astrology thing. So if you're watching this video, maybe you have come to a similar spot where all of a sudden you're interested in astrology and you want to know a little bit more about it. Or maybe you're not really that interested in it, but you've been hearing people talk about it, and maybe you've heard about the big three and people ask you, oh, you're a Taurus, well, what's your moon sign? And you want to understand what people are talking about when they say these things. Maybe you're just trying to fit in a little bit more, maybe figure out what your big three is. Maybe you're curious and starting on your astrological journey, or maybe you're just hearing about astrology for the first time and you just kind of want to know what it's all about. Whatever brings you to this video, I'm here, I'm Allie, and I'm here to explain the basics. What is your birth chart? Your birth chart, and maybe you've looked it up and you saw it and didn't understand what you were looking at, and that's why you're watching this video. So your birth chart is going to be a chart that describes where all of the planets were when you were born and what constellations were coming up over the horizon at the time of your birth, and what were these mathematical points at the time of your birth. And astrologers tend to consider the effect that your birth chart has on you as a being as the moment that you take your first breath into this world. I found that out because I have two children and one of them was born early, and I wondered if I should have based her birth chart on her actual due day or the day that she was born. And that was when I found out that it's based on breathing your first breath, earth side, out of your mother's womb. So if you have your birth chart and it's pretty confusing to you, the big three that everyone talks about is usually your sun sign, your moon sign, and your rising. Let's break down the basics of your big three, because that is typically what's trending right now and what people are going to be talking about when people are going to be asking you, okay? Your sun sign is the sign, the constellation, the group of stars that the sun was in at the time of your birth. And this is the one that everybody knows. This is the one that you hear about. You know, I grew up in a very religious environment that was anti-astrology, and I knew what my sun sign was because it was just, you know, it was a thing. It was part of the culture. So your sun sign is a little general, typically, especially if you don't dive super hard into astrology. But the sun sign is supposed to tell you what your ego is. It'll tell you like who you are at your core being, your core ego, the I am energy. That is what the sun sign represents. And if you don't really relate to your sun sign that much, it's important to look at other things. That's why people ask you what your big three are, because they want to know what are the other signs that are influencing your personality. The second sign that people usually tell people is their moon sign. And the moon sign is the constellation that the moon was in. at the time of your birth. And the moon is said to control your emotions, said to represent the way that you emotionally process things. It's very important in love, because how do you express your love? How do you express your feelings? In relations with yourself and with others, that is your moon sign. And the moon sign is very, very important because some people mostly represent their moon sign. Astrological research has said that oftentimes children more so represent their moon sign than their sun sign, because you don't start showing your sun sign and start representing your sun sign until you have matured into your ego, until you've matured into who you are as a person. So oftentimes the sun sign isn't even that prominent in your personality until later on when you've matured. So the moon sign is really important when trying to describe yourself to someone using astrology, because how do you process emotion? How do you express yourself? Maybe that is way more in tune with who you are than your sun sign. Maybe you're not that in tune to your ego and you're more in tune with your emotions. And if that's the case, you are going to more likely represent your moon sign than your sun sign. As for your rising is the constellation that was coming up over the horizon when you were born. And this rising tends to represents your ascendant. It's your first house. We can get into all of that later. To simplify it, your rising is how you come off to people, the way that you present yourself in front of people when they're getting to know you, your first impression. It influences the way that you look. It influences the way that people perceive you initially before they get to know you emotionally, before they get to know your ego. Your ascendant is what they see initially. That is what the big three are. Now let's talk about understanding how to find your big three. I personally like to use Cafe Astrology. It's free, it's online. You can type it into Google or whatever search engine you use, Cafe Astrology. You're going to need your date of birth, your time of birth. It's very important that you have your exact time of birth. Ask your mom, your dad, your grandparents, whoever. Ask them what time you were born. If they don't remember, there is a way, if you want to get real serious, to, if you're in the US at least, to get a copy, an extended copy of your birth certificate, because the regular copy of your birth certificate usually doesn't have your time of birth on it. I don't know about other countries. But you gotta have your exact time of birth. Once you have your exact time of birth, and you have your date of birth, and you have your place of birth, also very important. It's important the exact place that you were born. If you don't know the exact hospital address or home address, if you were born at home or wherever you were born, if you don't know the exact address, if you just have the city, that's also okay. Just the city, time, date. And you can type all of that in to Cafe Astrology or any other. If you just type in natal birth chart astrology, then you should be able to find a website where you put this information in and it will give you your list. It will give you your placements. Also, nowadays, there's a ton of apps that you can use to understand your birth chart. You're still going to need that information, time, place, date. You're still going to need to type that in. CoStar is a very popular one right now. I found that it's actually not 100% accurate because it had one of my placements wrong, but it's very easy to use, which is why it's very popular. And it's very aesthetic and it's fun. It's kind of like a social media. So if you're just starting out with astrology, CoStar is a good one to download. But I could recommend a bunch of different apps because I use several and I like to compare them to each other, and I like to get some information from this app and some information from this app. Time Nomad is my personal favorite. You can download any of these astrology apps and type in that information and it should be able to tell you your birth chart. And so then once you have your birth chart, you're going to look for your sun, your moon, and your rising. I am Astro Ally. This is Intro to Astrology, Astrology for Beginners. Thank you for watching.